There's a little bit of play on the wheel bearing of my Mazda 5, it's a 2012. So I'm gonna replace it with a toolkit that I rented from O'Reilly's. And here it is. The main component is a high pressure bolt right here, coupled with a high pressure nut. We will be using torsional force to remove and install the wheel bearing and hub without using a shop press. This is a main bracket right here with some horseshoe adapters and then some step washers on the left, and the others are just flanges. Let's begin. Break the axle nut. There are many ways to do this. And then with the wheel off, remove the axle nut. With some finagling, I have pulled out the axle from the hub. I've had to remove the ball joint or disconnect it from the spindle, that one there. Rotor is off, caliper is safely hanging out of the way. To get to the wheel bearing, we have to remove the hub first, and to do that, we'll pick an appropriate horseshoe adapter, one that sits well against the spindle. Now some of the adapters here doesn't fit, so it's easy to choose one. You could also position it underneath. I'm gonna set up the tool, configure it for hub removal. It should become apparent how it works as we go along. Insert the high pressure bolt through the hub with the bracket connected to it, just like that. And here's where we use the horseshoe adapter that we picked earlier. I'm choosing to put it underneath. You could screw or bolt that adapter to the bracket so it stays in place. And on the back side, we put the high pressure nut. Thread that in all the way, and it should butt up against the flange of that hub and then push it out of the spindle. So here it's all snugged up and ready to go. Check the other side. Make sure that the bolt is not rubbing against the inside of the hub. And if you want, you could put a step washer, just like that. But we won't do that in this case. Hold the nut in place with a wrench, and we're ready to crank up the bolt. Here we go. After a few cranks, the hub should start to move, like it is here. Double check that the bolt is also still not rubbing against the hub. Here's a different view from a hub that I pulled yesterday. As you crank it, it will slowly emerge out of the spindle, and there it is. The whole thing pulls out, and then you can remove the hub from the tool. The outer bearing race will remain with the hub, as you can see here. For this install, I'll be using a brand new hub. If you want to remove the race, use a Dremel to make a diagonal cut across the race, and then hit it with a cold chisel, and then it should be easy enough to remove. There's a retaining clip that holds the bearing in. I'm using a pair of long nose pliers just to compress it enough so I can insert or pry a screwdriver in there. Just pry around with a screwdriver, but make sure you have a good grip of the clip with the long nose pliers, because that will happen. Make sure you wear safety glasses. Here's the clip. It's in good condition. I'm gonna reuse it. Pardon the skid marks on the wheel well. We're gonna use the toolkit again, this time to pull the rest of the bearing out. So here's the bearing. It's sitting inside the spindle. We're going to use a step washer like this one to pull it out. It has to be sized just so the step washer is only touching the inner bearing race. On the back side, here's the spindle, the inner bearing race, and right there is the ABS sensor. Careful with that. So we choose an appropriately sized step washer. That one was a little too big. This one might be just a little too small. And this one is Goldilocks. On the other side, we use a flange, and again there's options to choose from, but make sure the one that you pick is big enough for the wheel bearing to go through. It should sit squarely against the spindle, and take a note of how it feels against the spindle when it's centered. The reason is we'll be using a spacer ring for the wheel bearing to come out into, and we won't have a visual as this happens. It's very important that the wheel bearing doesn't hit the flange as it comes out. For the wheel bearing extraction, we won't need the bracket, so we'll take that out, set it aside, make sure the bolt is greased. So we'll configure it for wheel bearing removal. The flange followed by the spacer ring and then the support plate. Center that right up, and then we'll put the bolt through. I already have the step washer on the back there. A little bit of knee action to push the bolt through. Then we'll put the high pressure nut. So it's all snugged up, ready to go. Check that the assembly is centered. We're going to be cranking this bolt right here, and on the back I have a wrench holding the nut, and it's propped up against the spindle or the knuckle. Here we go. If you have extension pipes, now would be the time to use it. The instructions on the toolkit said not to use power tools, so we're going manual all the way. Well, I'll be using the jack as well. Neighbor's dog got spooked. Take note that I've reconnected the ball joint of the lower control arm to the spindle for more support. And then you can go crazy with a wrench. We're not done yet, but I wanted to see the progress. So I'm pulling the toolkit out. As you can see, it's about maybe 3/4 out. Now the other reason why I removed the toolkit is because I wanted to show you another way that the toolkit can be configured to pull the bearing out. So here we are using the bracket again, and I'm still using the same step washer on the back side. You've noticed I used two of them. The second one is just a spacer, so I don't have to thread too much. I'm going to be using two horseshoe adapters, as you can see here. There's a lot more visibility with this configuration. And it's out. I cleaned the inside of the spindle. Here's the old bearing. Pay close attention to cleaning the channels too, where the lock ring goes into. I'm getting ready to install the new wheel bearing. I'm gonna use a step washer on the back that won't go through. I'll put the wheel bearing right there, and there will be another step washer to push it in. I chose a step washer that's big enough to sit within the lip of the spindle on the back. It should not go through. It's gonna sit there as an anchor for the nut. On the other side, the step washer must be just big enough to fit through the spindle. So here's my new wheel bearing straight from the freezer. For the Mazda 5, there's the side that's magnetic, and I'm testing it here with a nail. That's the magnetic side, and that should go inside. Now, there are some people who think that freezing the wheel bearing doesn't really do anything, but you know, if the cold doesn't bother you anyway, just let it go. So I have two washers up front here. The first one is just a spacer, so I don't have to thread the nut on the back too far in. I've got the other step nut on the back, and we're putting it together. Just make sure that the wheel bearing is sitting squarely against the spindle. So it's all snugged up and ready to go. And in the beginning, just go slowly, make sure the wheel bearing goes in straight. And then just go Khal Drogo on it. Now I'm working a little bit faster because, you know, you want to strike while the iron is hot. Or in this case, while the bearing is cold. I think definitely freezing the wheel bearings help in this case. I'm pausing a little bit here to check, make sure that that step washer is still centered. You don't want to hit it. You don't want it to hit the spindle as it goes in. And I think it just bottomed out. Big exhale. Take the tool out, let's see what we got. The wheel bearing is in. Make sure that it cleared the channel where the snap ring goes. Right there. So we're coming in with a snap ring. I'm just using a pair of long nose pliers. And again, wear eye protection here because it could snap. Squeeze that in there. Careful that your fingers don't get trapped in. And it's in. That was easier than I thought. But just make sure that it's in. I'll use my screwdriver to just tap around. Make sure that it's well seated in the channel. Final step, we're putting the hub back in. So here's the hub, and this is the wheel bearing where it will go through. So we're gonna push the flange through the wheel bearing, like that. So on the back, we need a step washer that's just big enough to go against the inner wheel bearing race, like this one. So it's gonna be like that. Put the hub through, and going right behind the hub will be a support plate, and the bolt goes right through there. Clean the mounting surface or the flange of the hub. Alright, so here's the high pressure bolt. I already have a spacer there. So I'll start with the support plate, followed by the hub, like so. And we got us a good, nice hub kebab. String that through the wheel bearing. Careful not to scratch the wheel bearing surface. And on the back, I have this space washer. And it should be the flat side going against the wheel bearing race. I'm gonna use another washer just as a spacer so I don't have to thread the nut too far in. Put that all together. Here's the nut. So it's all snugged up, ready to go. Oh, by the way, on the back I have that wrench that's holding the nut in place, also wedged up against the spindle. And we go again slowly to make sure that the flange goes in straight. The hub will spin a little bit until it realizes that it needs to go in. So here's a better angle where you can see the hub going in. This right here be the money shot. You'll feel a definite stop on mid-stroke when it bottoms out, and then you know you're done. When the flange goes into the wheel bearing, it's not gonna be flush. You can see here, it's not going to be quite flush, and that's the case here too. You can see that's the end of the flange. And that's done. Wheel bearing is in, new hub is in, and it's spinning smoothly. So we've come to the end of the video. This is where I'm going to end it. Make sure that the axle goes in through the new hub with no issues. Definitely saved me a lot of money doing it myself. The tool did not cost me anything. I appreciate O'Reilly's loaner tool program. It's great. I'm not affiliated with them. Took me half a day to do it, but I enjoyed it and I have a lot of free time. I did not have to disconnect the tie rods, so no alignment was necessary. I double checked using the string method and it all checked out. I leave you with a picture of my variable height celebratory drink holder. Thanks for watching.